Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When Malcolm returned from a quick trip, he found his private lake estate hijacked for an 800-person gala, organized without his consent, using forged documents and a fake company in his name. What followed wasn't just a legal battle, it was war. And Malcolm, he never loses on his land. I'd only been gone for 4 days. A quick trip to D.C. for a legal panel and a bit of catching up with some old contacts from my federal days. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee on the return drive when Clark, my head of security, called. The tone in his voice was flat, clipped. He only sounded like that when things were seriously out of place. "Sir," he said, "we've had activity on the property. Over the weekend, several trucks came through. Caterers, decorators, even a stage crew. They said your estate was reserved for an event." At first, I thought he was joking. I laughed. He didn't. They claimed to have a signed rental agreement. Said it was for a Willow Cove community gala. 800 guests. That stopped me cold. By the time I pulled through the gates of my estate, Lake Wake Bastion as I sometimes called it when I felt fancy, my gut was already coiling. There was a giant vinyl banner zip-tied to the main gate that read, in all caps, "Reserved for Willow Cove Community Gala. Private event. Do not enter." The absurdity was immediate and violent. The gates to my property were locked from the inside. I entered the code, drove through slowly, and was met with the unmistakable aftermath of unauthorized access. Deep tire ruts had carved up the manicured gravel leading toward the lakeside pavilion. Temporary metal stakes, ones I didn't install, lined a path down to the boat dock. There were folding tables stacked outside the guest hall, plastic tubs full of satin fabric, and 2 portable generator units still humming by the western hedgerow. I stepped out of the SUV and was met by Clark, stone-faced. He handed me a printed email. "You'll want to see this." It was a confirmation blast from a mass RSVP service. Thousands of invites, apparently sent from an account listed as event at willowcovagala.org. The header said, "Final reminder, your exclusive evening at the Lake Mansion." And right underneath it, in bold letters, my estate's exact address and GPS coordinates. The RSVP site proudly named me, or more specifically Malcolm West Holdings LLC, as the host. The problem? That entity didn't exist. I don't own this estate through an LLC. I never have. It's registered directly to me in the county land records, and has been since I bought it 12 years ago. Clark led me toward the lakeside pavilion. Inside, it looked like a wedding rehearsal had exploded. Velvet ropes, floral arrangements, banners printed with celebrating the heart of Willow Cove, even a champagne wall half-stocked. Someone had installed temporary lighting rigs, and sound equipment was wired across the floor. I felt like I'd walked onto a set for a low-budget reality show about suburban cults. Then I heard a car door slam. From the upper road, a glossy black Escalade came rolling in like it was on a goddamn red carpet. Out stepped Karen McIntyre, HOA, president of Willow Cove, queen of floral blazers, the woman who once tried to force my landscaper to remove native reeds because they ruined the community's visual harmony. And there she was, heels crunching across my gravel as if she owned the place. "Malcolm," she beamed, "you're back early." I was hoping we could talk. I didn't respond, just stared. She motioned vaguely toward the mess. "I understand the surprise, but this is all for a wonderful cause. We voted in a resolution committee for community engagement that this estate is an ideal venue for our annual gala. We needed something memorable this year. With all due respect, it's only one night. We were sure you'd support the initiative." "You were sure?" I asked. "Yes. And the RSVP list is through the roof. Over 800 confirmed. I mean, it's happening, Malcolm. And frankly, you'd be doing the entire neighborhood a disservice by shutting it down now." "You're on my property, Karen," she blinked. "Well, I wouldn't say on. We're just setting up. Besides, we have a signed agreement with your LLC. I don't have an LLC. I own this land under my own name." She pulled a folded document from her purse like she was drawing a pistol. "Then what's this?" I took it. It was a rental agreement, all right, signed by someone claiming to be CEO of Malcolm West Holdings, LLC, spelled Malcolm, not Malcolm. Wrong signature, wrong entity, a fake. "You faked this." Karen chuckled nervously. "Let's not be dramatic. It was a formality. Everyone agreed this venue was underutilized and, look, If you'd rather not attend, we understand. We'll clean everything up afterward. Or you can stay at the lodge up the hill and just enjoy the peace." I stepped closer. "You're trespassing. Your vendors are trespassing. Your entire guest list will be trespassing. And if you think for 1 second I'm letting 800 people set foot on my land because you voted on a fucking picnic committee, you are out of your mind." She stiffened. "There's no need for hostility. I'm trying to bridge communities. You forged a rental agreement." "That's a felony." Karen opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't wait. I turned to Clark. "Lock down the gates. Disable external power access. Call the sheriff. Nobody gets in." By the time the first sheriff's patrol unit arrived, a line of vehicles was already forming at the base of the driveway. Out-of-town plates, SUVs full of HOA faithfuls wearing pastel polos and semi-formal gala attire. A few stepped out confused, clutching printed RSVP cards. When the officer approached, Karen hurried over, waving the forged agreement and trying to smile like a woman who'd just bumped into an old friend at brunch. I cut through her explanation. "Officer, this document is falsified. I own the estate personally. No LLC. No authorization. These people are being intentionally misled. This is trespassing and attempted fraud." He scanned the paper, raised an eyebrow. "We'll need to look into this," he said carefully. "Might be a civil matter, at least until we confirm intent." Oh, we'd confirm it. But right then, watching Karen pretend this was all some harmless misunderstanding, watching SUVs full of strangers piling up by my lake, I realized this wasn't just about property. It was about control, and I don't lose control. Not on my land. By sunrise the next morning, I was seated at my kitchen counter, sleeves rolled up, coffee in one hand, and my laptop open to a dozen tabs. County parcel records, title verification, signature verification services, and document metadata tools. I hadn't slept. I didn't need to. Rage keeps you sharp. Clark had already compiled surveillance footage from every motion-triggered camera on the property. Dozens of vehicles, clear license plates, faces, timestamps, even one drone flyover we didn't authorize. Probably some overzealous guest trying to film their arrival for TikTok clout. I forwarded everything to my attorney, Nancy Caldwell, a litigation shark I'd worked with back in my federal days. She responded within 10 minutes. "This is actionable. I'm on my way." By mid-morning, the house felt like a war room. Nancy arrived in a gray blazer and sneakers, laptop under one arm, a case folder the thickness of a city ordinance code in the other. She glanced once at the folder Clark handed her and muttered, "Oh good, we're dealing with idiots. I love idiots. We started with the forged agreement." Nancy read it twice, snorted, and said, "Wrong tax ID, wrong legal name, a phantom LLC, and this signature looks like it was drawn by a child with a blood sugar drop." She flipped the last page toward me. "They even used Arial rounded. Not even criminals use that font." Within the hour, she had drafted a temporary restraining order request for the local court. We attached aerial footage, security logs, time-stamped images of unauthorized equipment on the premises, and, most damningly, a video clip of Karen herself saying, "On camera, you can stay at the lodge if it bothers you." That one line turned it from negligence to intent. Around noon, as we were compiling evidence, a white Lexus crept up the main drive. Karen again, this time with two clipboard-carrying women in tow, fellow members of what she later referred to as the Community Goodwill Subcommittee. They stepped out like diplomats arriving for high-stakes peace talks. Karen didn't even wait to be acknowledged. "Malcolm, I really hope you're done with the overreaction," she said, motioning toward the estate. "We're here to finalize floor layouts and confirm AV setups. Time is tight. The tent crew is asking about wind direction. You are not stepping another foot on my property." She blinked in faux confusion. "We were just told to double-check final staging. We assumed your tantrum was—" Finished, Nancy stood and crossed her arms. "Ma'am, any further presence on this land will constitute willful trespass. We've filed for a restraining order. You've been served digitally, and a physical copy is being couriered to the HOA office. You are now officially on notice." Karen's eyes narrowed. "You're going to file a lawsuit over a party?" I laughed, sharp and humorless. "Not a party. An invasion. A forged contract. And the mass mobilization of out-of-state guests onto private land without consent. That's not a neighborhood bake sale, Karen. That's organized trespass." One of her clipboard assistants tried to chime in. "We meant no harm." But Nancy cut her off. Intent doesn't erase illegality. We have documentation of 23 separate vehicle entries, active installation of staging structures, unauthorized generator hookups, and evidence of physical damage to private property. She flipped through her case binder and stopped on a page. Oh, and someone knocked over the GPS alignment post for the helipad. That alone is a $30,000 recalibration. Karen's face flushed. You're really going to waste everyone's time in court? Just let it happen. We'll clean up. I'm not in the real estate business, Karen, I said. I'm in the property rights business. You don't get to vote my consent into existence. As if on cue, the sheriff's deputy rolled up the driveway. Same one from yesterday, this time accompanied by a second officer and what looked like a county clerk. They stepped out and approached the standoff, nodding to Clark and me. Karen, still clinging to her paper fantasy of authority, rushed to meet them. Deputies! We're just finalizing our preparations for the gala. We've got everything under control. The senior deputy, Captain Winslow by his badge, nodded slowly. Ma'am, I have here a notice of requested temporary injunction filed against you and the Willow Cove HOA. Until the court rules, you are ordered to cease all actions involving this property, effective immediately. Karen turned to me. This is madness. You're making a scene. You made the scene, I said calmly. I'm just changing the ending. Captain Winslow handed Karen a paper envelope. She grabbed it as if it were radioactive. Then he turned to me. Mr. West, we'll be leaving one cruiser parked at the gate overnight as a deterrent. If you authorize it, we'll patrol the shoreline and the private dock perimeter hourly until further notice. Approved, I said without hesitation. Karen and her entourage walked back to the Lexus, visibly shaken for the first time. I caught a glimpse of one of her clipboard lackeys making a panicked phone call as they drove off. The gala was unraveling, and it was only day 2. Back inside, Nancy called the court clerk to expedite the judge's signature on the TRO. I opened my laptop again and pulled up the RSVP site. Over 800 names. Some had included personal notes. One read, "Looking forward to seeing how the rich live. Can't wait to explore the house." Another simply said, "Bringing my 3 dogs. Hope there's a lawn." These people weren't just duped, they were invading under false pretenses. And whether or not they realized it, they were about to pay the price for someone else's fantasy of communal entitlement. I turned to Nancy. I want every guest on that list named. Every one. And I want them sued. She didn't even blink. We'll need plate numbers, time-stamped footage, ID matching, cross-referenced RSVPs, and platform metadata. Clark stepped forward and handed her a flash drive. Already compiling. Nancy grinned. Then let's make history. The next 72 hours felt less like property management and more like forensic warfare. My estate, my staff, and my legal team had effectively turned into a tactical operations center. Nancy took over the upstairs study, commandeered the dining room table for evidence sorting, and rotated between 4 burner phones she kept in a canvas pouch labeled local hostiles. Clark tripled security rounds and began sleeping in the guest wing with a SIG on the nightstand. I barely left the house except to pace. We had one job, build the ledger. Every name, every vehicle, every footprint, every trespass. It started with the camera network. Over the years, I'd invested heavily in private surveillance, mostly to catch raccoons in the koi pond and the occasional drunk boater who thought no docking signs were optional. But that week, it earned back every cent. Clark's team pulled high-res footage from over 26 mounted cameras, including motion-triggered time lapses, infrared night shots, and wide-angle drone sweeps. What we found was worse than I'd assumed. They hadn't just driven up and set up equipment. Some had picnicked on the lawn, spread towels across the helipad, let their kids splash in the reflecting pool. One guy in a neon green shirt relieved himself behind the north pergola. A woman in wedges trampled through my irises like she was crossing a parking lot. There was even footage of someone dragging a cooler into the boathouse and popping open a beer like he owned the dock. That one especially stuck with me. He'd raised his can to the sunset like it was his damn lake. We began cross-referencing license plates with the RSVP list, overlaying timestamps with entry logs. Clark's tech guy, Devin, rigged a visual database that let us scroll through clips by guest name, arrival time, vehicle type, and activity. The screen looked like a dystopian guest book. Meanwhile, Nancy was tearing through every policy, precedent, and procedural loophole in the state code. She brought in a digital forensics specialist to extract metadata from the forged rental agreement. The PDF had been edited in Adobe Acrobat, saved from a Gmail draft, and, this part made her laugh, had a listed author named KM Executive. The signature didn't even match the one on Karen's HOA filings. They hadn't even tried to mask it. We issued preservation letters to every vendor involved, AV crew, caterers, tent companies, linen rentals, legally binding them to retain all communications, contracts, and payment histories. Some of them panicked and folded immediately. One catering firm sent over a full packet of emails, invoices, and text screenshots. The event had been coordinated directly by Karen M., president of Willow Cove HOA, who referred to herself as acting on behalf of M. West Holdings, LLC. There it was again, that fictitious entity they thought could shield them. One rental vendor, a company out of Greensboro, claimed they were told I'd be out of town and totally approved of the whole thing. They'd even received an email with a forged insurance rider attached. Nancy flagged it as fraud within 30 seconds. And then came the real payload. Clark's surveillance system included automatic license plate recognition. Turns out, when you enter through my main gates, your front and rear plates get time-stamped and stored in a private encrypted log. We had 82 unique vehicles on record over a 48-hour span, some with North Carolina tags, others from South Carolina, Georgia, Virginia, even as far as Ohio and Maryland. Nancy's paralegal spent the next day pairing those plate numbers with DMV records, online RSVPs, LinkedIn profiles, and publicly available social media. By sunset, we had a spreadsheet of 319 positively identified individuals, full names, contact information, timestamps, and supporting imagery. The stories practically wrote themselves. James E., 46, drove in from Savannah in a silver Audi, brought 2 minors, and posed for Instagram selfies at my dock with the caption, "Living the high life at the mansion." Teresa B., 38, posted a Facebook reel twirling on my lawn in heels, tagging #Willow Cove Royalty and #Private Lake Party. A group of 6 arriving in a rental van left behind a cooler filled with shrimp tails, cocktail sauce, and several vape cartridges with children's cartoon branding. Nancy reviewed the evidence like a general plotting airstrikes. Every single person who stepped foot past the gate is liable. Every foot on grass is a civil action. They may not have known it was unauthorized, but ignorance doesn't void trespass. Especially when the gate was closed, marked private, and guarded, I was impressed. Also furious. The footage didn't lie. These people weren't just tricked party-goers. They were eager voyeurs, trespassers in pressed linen and designer sneakers, here to ogle a lake house and snap photos like they were royalty on a cruise ship. My land had been rebranded without consent, treated like a fucking wedding venue because a power-hungry HOA queen thought a vote could override ownership. Let's prepare the claims, I told Nancy. Individually, name by name. She looked up. You want to go scorched earth? No, I said, tapping the screen where James E. was posing by my dock. I want to go precise. 180,000 per head. Civil trespass, invasion of privacy, private nuisance, and damage to property. Plus costs. She smiled like a lioness. Good, because by my estimate, you've got enough claims for $140 million. When I tell people I sued 800 individuals in less than 2 weeks, they assume I'm exaggerating, or bluffing, or crazy. I'm not. I'm just well organized and extremely pissed off. Nancy and I began with a standard complaint template, trespass, nuisance, and property damage, then tailored the language for each individual based on degree of involvement. Some danced on my lawn, some parked on my gravel path, some posted my address online. Every variation mattered, and with 319 guests already confirmed by name, plate, or social media, we had a rock-solid foundation. The rest came from subpoenas and voluntary disclosures. Once vendors and platforms realized they'd been roped into a fraud scheme, they scrambled to cooperate. Eventbrite coughed up RSVP records tied to emails, IP addresses, and payment histories. Airbnb disclosed chat logs between Karen and various guests she tried to house nearby through informal block reservations. One caterer even turned over voice messages, Karen's nasal voice declaring the property secured by community mandate and requesting additional champagne flutes for the dignitary section. I wasn't even angry at the guests themselves. Not really. I was furious at what they represented. Entitlement at scale. The belief that if something looks public, pretty enough, clean enough, large enough, it must be up for grabs. The idea that land ownership is flexible, optional, something that can be overruled by group consensus or aesthetic logic. So I made it personal, not just against Karen, but against every guest who ate shrimp on my dock, took selfies with my swan sculpture, or let their kids climb the azaleas by the reflecting pool. I hired 3 law firms and 5 paralegals to help draft and file the claims across 4 state jurisdictions. Each person received a certified envelope containing a civil complaint for $180,000 in damages, still images from video footage of their presence, timestamp logs from surveillance, a demand for preservation of evidence, an invitation to settle. Privately for $30,000. That last line stirred the hive. Within 24 hours, I had 36 frantic voicemails from people claiming they had no idea, were told it was legal, or thought it was a public venue. One man sobbed about how it was his daughter's birthday. A couple from Maryland offered me their boat in lieu of cash. Another guest, a lifestyle influencer from Atlanta, tried to delete all her posts, but we already had them archived. The press got wind within 72 hours. Millionaire suing 800 people after surprise mansion gala. HOA, president booked private estate without owner's consent. Lake house nightmare, guests hit with lawsuits after attending party. I didn't speak to the media. Nancy did. Calm, eloquent, legally surgical. She explained that this was not just trespass. It was a mass incursion backed by fraud and organized by a rogue HOA. She dropped Karen's name, the fake LLC, the forged agreements, and the criminal angle with the DA's office. She let slip that some guests might face not just civil, but criminal charges depending on evidence. Karen responded with a Facebook Live from the Willow Cove gazebo. Her makeup was immaculate, her blouse pressed, and her tone righteous. "We were simply trying to bring the community together," she said, framed by potted ferns and badly placed uplighting. "This isn't about money. It's about control. Mr. West thinks his wealth gives him the right to shut out good people. But we won't be bullied." I sent a clip to Nancy. "She's doubling down," I said. Nancy smirked. She just linked herself to every action, on record, with her face. Things got more chaotic from there. Half the HOA board resigned after realizing they'd been named in a class action suit. Willow Cove's insurance provider issued a notice of policy reevaluation. Local police began interviewing vendors. I started getting calls from law professors asking if I'd give a talk about mass civil enforcement strategy. Meanwhile, the settlement offers began to trickle in. Some quietly paid the $30,000. Others asked for payment plans. A few tried to countersue for emotional distress, but their cases didn't survive the first motion. One guy actually posted a TikTok of himself opening the complaint with the caption, "Guess I shouldn't have RSVP'd, LOL," which we used in our amended filing to show knowing participation. Then Karen made her next move. She held a town hall at the HOA clubhouse and claimed she was actively working with Mr. West's team to resolve the matter amicably. She said she had secured an agreement on my behalf to drop all charges if the HOA paid for lawn restoration and issued a formal apology. She even printed a letter with my name on it in a font that wasn't even close to my legal correspondence. Nancy got a copy from one of the guests. We compared the signature. It was forged. Again. But this time, it wasn't just impersonation. It was obstruction. She had now faked a legal settlement letter involving pending litigation. "Now she's done," Nancy said. "This is prison time." By the time the district attorney scheduled a preliminary hearing, the narrative had flipped completely. What began as a bizarre case of trespassing at a lake mansion had become a full-blown fraud investigation. And at the center of it stood Karen McIntyre, pristine in her pearls, wrapped in delusion, and now facing 7 federal charges. It started with the forged settlement letter. Nancy wasted no time. She compiled a dossier, side-by-side comparisons of my real signature and Karen's imitation, metadata from the document file, and a chain of custody tracing the letter's distribution to over 400 HOA residents. She submitted it to the DA's office alongside a criminal complaint for identity fraud, obstruction of justice, and tampering with ongoing civil litigation. That same day, Karen received a visit from two plainclothes investigators. She tried to film it, of course, smiled through the doorway like she was being interviewed for a reality show, and asked them to come back when her attorney was available. They didn't. They stepped inside with a warrant and left with her desktop, phone, printer, and a box of HOA records. The next morning, I woke up to texts from Nancy, all in caps. FBI contacted. This is going federal. Turns out Karen's fake LLC, Malcolm West Holdings LLC, wasn't just a name drop. She had filed paperwork with the state 2 months prior, forged under a stolen EIN number, and listed herself as executive manager. She'd created bank accounts in the fake company's name and used them to funnel payments from party vendors. Essentially, she invented a shadow corporation to impersonate me and launder Gala expenses through it like she was running a film set, not a neighborhood committee. The paper trail was damning. There were Venmo transfers, falsified receipts, and calendar invites titled things like Gala Site Inspection, Malcolm W. Conniff, she even booked a drone photographer, giving my house coordinates as the shoot location and claiming to be the property manager. When questioned, the photographer gave a statement that chilled even Nancy. She said the owner was away in D.C. and that he was donating the space to the community in honor of Juneteenth. I couldn't decide whether to laugh or vomit. Meanwhile, things unraveled in Willow Cove. Without Karen at the helm, the HOA board fractured like wet drywall. Residents began demanding transparency. Some emailed me directly with apologies or pleas to go easy. One man offered to host a barbecue in my honor. Another wrote a 3-page letter about his mortgage and how his wife had cried every night since the lawsuit. I didn't answer any of them. And then came the arrests. Karen was taken into custody at a boutique nail salon where she was getting gel tips in HOA executive pink. Footage showed her calmly lowering her hand into the UV lamp as officers entered, then indignantly asking for 5 minutes to wrap up. She was charged with wire fraud, forgery of legal documents, identity theft, criminal impersonation, obstruction of civil litigation, conspiracy to commit property fraud, trespass by proxy. The mugshot hit the internet within hours. Her expression was somewhere between disbelief and a Botox freeze. Local news ran with it like it was OJ trial season. HO president arrested for staging illegal gala on private property. Willow Cove collapses under mountain of lawsuits. Karen strikes again. This time it's personal. I watched it all from my back porch, sipping bourbon and scrolling headlines. Clark installed additional security cameras that week, motion-triggered alerts, facial recognition, and even a private drone tether that hovered silently at night. My lawn became less of a garden and more of a perimeter. Meanwhile, Nancy worked overtime. Over 400 guests had been identified by now. Settlement offers continued to roll in, some paid immediately, others requested arbitration. A few tried to start a GoFundMe, but public opinion had already turned. People didn't want to support entitled weekend invaders. They wanted blood. We'd reached the tipping point. Of the 800 attendees, 312 settled for $30,000 each. Another 220 refused and ended up losing in small claims court, most without competent counsel. The remaining guests were either missing, hiding, or preparing to file bankruptcy. And still, I wasn't done. Karen, even from jail, attempted to release a statement through her lawyer. She claimed to be the victim of a smear campaign orchestrated by a reclusive millionaire with abandonment issues. Her legal team tried to argue that the gala was a spontaneous communal act. They even cited a bizarre legal theory rooted in adverse use of open recreational space. Nancy shredded it on live television. That only applies to vacant public lots, not private lakefront estates with fences, cameras, and armed security. This is fantasy law. And with that, we began filing asset liens. Every attendee who hadn't settled was now facing a cascade of judgments, garnishments, and damage claims. My estate had become a legal weapon, not out of spite, but out of principle. No one gets to vote away my ownership, not because they're friendly or persuasive or wearing heels, because it's mine. And now they all knew it. I never set out to be a public figure. In fact, I built this estate specifically to disappear. But by the time the pretrial hearings began, I had become something of an unwilling folk hero, part legal avenger, part meme, part cautionary tale for suburban overreach. Courtroom A9 of the Wake County Superior Courthouse had never seen so many media credentials. CNN was there, so was Fox. Local bloggers, national law podcasts, even a Netflix scouting producer who slipped his card into Nancy's briefcase during recess. I watched from the side table while Nancy stood before the judge in her charcoal gray blazer and utterly incinerated the defense team. Karen, flanked by two attorneys and still pretending this was all some bureaucratic mix-up, tried to wear her innocence like perfume. But the courtroom didn't buy it. Especially not after Nancy played audio recordings of Karen instructing a florist to hide the vendor trucks behind the hedges so the security cameras don't catch them, or when the prosecutor displayed a projector slide of the forged LLC application complete with Karen's IP address and timestamp metadata. The judge raised his eyebrows. So she created a fake company to impersonate the plaintiff, then booked an event for 800 people using that false identity. Nancy smiled. Yes, Your Honor. Then, when caught, she attempted to fabricate a settlement letter to obstruct pending litigation. Karen's defense team tried every angle, questioned the admissibility of the surveillance footage, claimed Karen had been misled by rogue board members, and even floated a half-baked theory that my lakefront property was technically part of a disputed public easement dating back to the early 20th century. Nancy shut that down in under 30 seconds by submitting county plat maps and deed records dating back to 1936, notarized and backed by federal land registry stamps. But the real showstopper came when the prosecution revealed the depth of financial transactions through the fake LLC. There were over 120 flag deposits, vendor payments, guest donations, Gala pre-orders for community sashes, and VIP marina wristbands. Karen had even ordered commemorative mugs with the phrase Willow Cove Legacy Gala 2025, hosted by MWH Estates, printed in gold foil. She'd billed it as an annual philanthropic tradition, fully intending to make this a repeat affair. The courtroom went silent. One guest, an elderly woman from South Carolina, stood up during the lunch recess and asked if she'd be arrested for just attending. Another man, a vendor who'd been named in the civil suits, tried to serve Karen with his own small claim summons right there in the hallway. Security had to escort them both out. Meanwhile, Nancy met with a coalition of settlement attorneys behind closed doors. They drafted an aggressive offer. Any guest who hadn't yet settled would have 72 hours to pay a reduced sum of $20,000 in exchange for full immunity from further pursuit. If they declined, our legal team would file secondary charges for coordinated civil trespass, public nuisance, and aggravated property damage. Most took the deal. Back at the estate, Clark and the security team finished installing the new perimeter system. Drones now patrolled in coordinated arcs, equipped with thermal imaging. License plate readers fed directly into a private database tied to county records. The entry road was lined with motion-triggered floodlights and discreet microphones. It no longer felt like a home. It felt like a fortress. And maybe that was the point. The HOA, for all intents and purposes, ceased to exist. With Karen in custody and the rest of the board under civil scrutiny, residents voted to dissolve the association. But that didn't stop them from holding a final emergency meeting, where several members attempted to issue a statement disavowing Karen's actions and pleading for community healing. I responded with a single-page letter. This matter is now between myself and the courts. I do not engage in HOA-sponsored PR theater. Stay off my property. Public interest only grew. Memes exploded. My favorite, a photo of my doc overlaid with the words "Enter and be sued," styled like a motivational poster. People sent me t-shirts, stickers, even a bobblehead of Karen in handcuffs labeled Queen of Trespass. The internet has a dark sense of humor, but I didn't mind. It helped drown out the real fury simmering beneath the surface. Because even with Karen behind bars and lawsuits flying like confetti, I knew one thing. Someone, somewhere, was going to try this again. Maybe not with a fake LLC. Maybe not with 1,000 shrimp canapes and stage lighting, but the mindset. The belief that private property is negotiable. That danger hadn't passed, and that's why I kept building. Cameras, contracts, legal frameworks. Not to shut people out, but to make sure no one ever mistook my silence for permission again. The sentencing hearing was standing room only. Karen stood between two marshals in a beige pantsuit that looked more courtroom chic than jail issued. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She just stared straight ahead, like she still believed this would all dissolve into apology letters and HOA meetings. The judge didn't see it that way. 12 years. That was the sentence. 12 years for wire fraud, identity theft, criminal impersonation, forgery, obstruction, and conspiracy. No parole for at least 7. Her attorneys looked gutted. Karen blinked twice and finally cracked, whispering something about trying to do good, as the marshals took her away. I didn't clap. I didn't nod. I just sat there, quiet, arms folded. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was the weight of finality. Back at the estate, the cleanup had become a project of its own. Clark oversaw the regrading of the lawn where trucks had torn ruts during the gala. We replaced all the external locks and reinforced the guest pavilion structure. A new sign went up at the front gate, matte black steel with bold white letters. Private property, not a venue. Trespassers will be prosecuted. By this point, over 500 of the original 800 guests had either settled or lost in court. The rest, liens, wage garnishments, and collectors. It wasn't personal, it was policy. Nancy's firm was now fielding requests from other landowners. Apparently, news of my case had inspired dozens across the state to re-examine their own HOA conflicts. She called it the West Effect. I wasn't sure if I liked that. The mansion itself had changed. Not physically, though we did upgrade the security office, but emotionally. It no longer felt like a retreat. It felt like a position, a bastion. Friends who used to stop by for weekends now texted instead. Nobody wanted to be caught in some new scandal by association. And maybe that was fine. One evening, I stood by the edge of the dock, watching the sun burn over Lake Wakely. The water was quiet again. No music, no crowds, no caterers with shrimp trays, just silence and the occasional sound of herons breaking the surface. I thought about erasing the whole incident, moving, selling, starting over somewhere without a Karen in sight. But then I remembered what I told the HOA board the day they tried to heal. This wasn't about revenge. This was about precedent. If I let it go, even once, the next HOA, the next neighbor, the next Karen would see my lake and think he didn't stop the last one. So I stayed. I reinforced. I made the rules clear and non-negotiable. Because the truth is, property isn't just land. It's boundary. It's identity. And no one, no Gala, no committee, no fraud with a smile was ever going to take that from me again. The estate has a new name now, official, etched into the bronze plaque at the front gate and stamped across the stationery on my desk, the West Bastion. It wasn't for vanity. It was a line in the sand, a statement to anyone who still harbored ideas about community galas or shared lakeside visions. This place wasn't a venue, a shared resource, or a backdrop for social media influencers. It was mine. I hired a private legal team, not just for future lawsuits, but to build a framework, a defensive perimeter made of policies, patents, and property rights with no ambiguity. I even filed a cease and desist against a local wedding blog that listed my estate as a potential hidden gem for luxury events. They retracted it within 48 hours and offered me an apology basket full of scented candles and brie. I sent it straight back. Nancy and I kept in touch. She wasn't just my attorney anymore. We'd been through something unusual together. She called it a landmark case, though I called it Tuesday. She offered to help me start something broader, and we did. HOA Watch, a nonprofit consulting group for private landowners harassed by overreaching HOAs. I don't appear in their ads or videos, but my name shows up in their legal guides, and once in a while, I'll take a quiet call from someone in Montana or Georgia who says, "They tried to do to me what they did to you." Sometimes I wonder if Karen ever really understood what she did. Not just the fraud, the forgery, or the trespass, but the assumption that what's mine could be voted on, scheduled, and handed out like a block party permit, that she could force generosity at the tip of a fake LLC, that just because something is beautiful and well-maintained, it somehow owes its existence to those who didn't build it. She didn't steal money. She tried to steal the idea of ownership. So I made sure she failed. The Bastion isn't a lonely place. It's just quiet. And I've come to value that. Sometimes my brother brings his kids up for the weekend. Sometimes I just sit out on the dock with a good scotch and a terrible paperback and let the herons land like they own the place. They don't. But they're not trying to throw a gala either. I kept the gate sign, though I upgraded it. Now it reads, "This is private territory. not a venue. Trespass and be sued. The West Bastion, EST, 2025. I don't lock the world out. I just make sure it knocks first, and when it doesn't, I make sure it regrets it.